Hi everyone. I think we'll start to get going with a little bit of intro. The numbers are still going up, but all is good there. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm Anna from the TUC and I'm joined by three guests who I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute, but we have Sarah from the NEU, Graham from the Trade Union Clean Air Network and Rory from the ITUC, but I'll be getting onto them more in a second. So we do have captions available today. You should be able to enable them by clicking the More button at the bottom of the screen, and you can switch those on. Great to see so many of you already taking part in the chat panel on the right-hand side. My colleagues are there to answer any of your questions and to post links to resources. I know we also have Shelley Asquith, the TUC's Health and Safety lead there as well. So she will be able to answer any specific questions you might have or take them aside. We do also have the opportunity to put questions to our panel. So at the bottom of the screen, you see there's a Q&A button that looks like two speech bubbles. You can post any questions you've got for our panel there, and we'll get to as many as we can after we've heard from each of our panelists. We will, of course, be recording today's webinar as we always do, and we will send you a link either later today or first thing tomorrow to the recording, along with any resources that we share today. So don't worry if you miss any or if you have to leave early or something, we're recording it for you to catch up on. So today we're talking about climate and health and safety specifically in a changing climate. And as I said, we're joined by Sarah from the NEU, and Sarah is the Health, Safety and Environment Lead. And she's going to kick us off by telling us a little bit about some of the work that has been happening at NEU. So Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you, ask you to get us started, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I'm going to talk to you about the Joint Union Heatwave Protocol. When I was preparing for today, I remembered that I spoke at a similar TUC event 2 years ago, back in July 2022, and I spoke then about risk assessing for heat. And what happened shortly after that was that we were hit by the most extreme temperatures we'd ever faced in this country, so 40 degrees in many places. And from the perspective of education staff, this happened during term time, so which really brought it home to everyone that the climate crisis is happening now, not in the future, and that it's very much a health and safety issue. And that 2022 heat wave was shocking, I think you'd agree, in its intensity and the disruption that it caused. But we know that it's the shape of things to come, and that the climate crisis will lead to more frequent and longer such episodes. And schools and colleges, like any other workplace, need to be resilient to these events. So that was the context in which we developed the Joint Union Heatwave Protocol. And it really started with the response of the Department for Education to the 2022 heat wave, because had that been better, maybe we wouldn't have needed to go down this road. But the DfE's response and the support it provided to schools was particularly poor, even by its own standards. The communication was at best ambiguous, and I'll give you an example. So the key question was whether schools should remain open or not, and the DfE, and I quote, said, "We aren't advising schools to close during high temperatures." So were they saying that schools shouldn't close? Maybe not, but it was infuriatingly and I would say deliberately ambiguous and aimed at making head teachers wary of making their own decision based on a risk assessment. And schools don't need the DfE permission to make day-to-day operational decisions, but I think many leaders clearly felt under pressure to remain fully open because of what was wording that was coming out of the DfE, even if their risk assessment suggested it was not the right response. And as far as we were concerned, the correct response would have been to say to school leaders that it was their decision, following a risk assessment in consultation with health and safety reps and staff, whether it was appropriate to open fully or partly, or whether to close early, whatever was appropriate. And it's worth noting during that heat wave that that some schools, even in the worst affected areas, stayed fully open even without air conditioning and with union support, on the grounds that vulnerable pupils would otherwise have been at home in high-rise flats in an even worse situation. So it's certainly not the case that we were saying that all schools should have closed on a blanket basis. Anyway, after that heat wave, all the unions representing staff in education who had been equally unimpressed with the tone and quality of guidance decided to produce something of our own to help employers and union reps work together. And what we came up with, we called the Joint Union Heatwave Protocol, and the aim was to help, make better plans for future heat waves so that schools could make the right decision for their circumstances when the next heat wave came along. And the unions evolved, apart from NEU, were Unite, GMB, Unison, NASCWT, NAHT, ASCL, Community, and UCU, so across the board. So we're going to post it in the chat, but it's really kind of common sense and simple stuff, and it's all about planning. It suggests short-term and longer-term measures that can be considered and introduced. It's aimed at education, obviously, but I think the principles apply across a range of workplaces. And it highlights that it's important that staff and union reps are consulted, because people who work in schools, obviously, they know how they operate, they know what the issues are, they know which classrooms are going to be most affected by heat, they know which children and which staff are going to be most vulnerable, and they'll have good ideas about what you can do about this. And who better than a health and safety rep or a green rep to consult with members, gather their suggestions and negotiate with management. As I said, the protocol focuses on the long and the short term. So I'll just give you some examples of the longer term measures. They're things that will make a difference, but only if they're planned for. They're not going to be able to be brought in at the drop of a hat. So things like developing shady areas, that's going to rely on planting or construction or buying material. So it's not an overnight thing. Similar with reviewing ventilation, particularly in kitchens. So again, not an overnight thing. Fitting of external window shutters, that's another possibility. Heat reflective blinds, curtains. Planning for which parts of a building might not be usable in extreme high temperatures based on experience of previous heat waves. So that's very important. It's likely that south or west facing rooms are going to be the hardest to keep cool. For schools, planning suitable lunch menus for the second half of the summer term on the assumption that the weather will be hot. And then if it isn't, well, it doesn't matter, does it? You can still eat ice creams and salads all year round. Ensuring you've got sufficient numbers of fans that are available. Again, it's the kind of thing that tends to sell out once there's a heat wave has happened. So you've got to plan for that. Possibly air conditioner units for worst affected areas. Obviously, that's far from ideal in relation to environmental concerns, but it might be needed until such time as buildings are more heat resilient. Another suggestion we include is timetabling sports days or other outdoor events for earlier in the year, and including a contingency days if it's too hot or if it's pouring with rain. So all those kind of things are common sense, really. Also planning for the possibility of needing to alter the timing of the school day, starting earlier during the cooler period, and advising parents that might be the response. So you're not kind of springing on anyone. It's all kind of part of a long-term plan that you can share. Also thinking about the needs of staff or pupils who might have, higher susceptibility to extreme heat, those with underlying medical conditions, pregnant staff, for example. Ensuring that all staff and learners are aware of the health risks of extreme heat, the symptoms of heat stress, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, so they can recognize that in the children and in their colleagues. If you think of the recent case of Michael Mosley, it just shows how a kind of sort of what might seem like a slight misjudgment can then lead to tragedy. So then looking at shorter term measures. So here we're talking about measures that can be introduced much more quickly without lots of planning, or measures from the long-term plan that then can be quickly triggered at short notice. So things like curtailing heat generating activities, use of computer monitors, printers, Bunsen burners, ovens, not always possible, but so far as is possible, turning equipment off rather than leaving it on standby, allowing easy access to drinking water for staff and children, and actively encouraging people to drink more. Relocating classes to cooler rooms if there is the space, and again that would have been considered as part of the long-term plan. Relaxing dress codes and uniforms for staff and learners. It costs nothing and it's really effective. We heard of a case last week where a girl had become ill at school because of the heat, and when she returned and it was still hot, she wasn't allowed to take her blazer off. Just despair of attitudes like that. And where staff and learners are outside, then encouraging the use of sunscreens and sunblock. And obviously, if you're dealing with little children, it's a question of making sure parents are aware of the need to ensure it's applied at the start of the day. You've got to think about those who are working or learning in a kitchen environment. They're going to need more frequent breaks. You're going to need to remove vigorous physical activity from the timetable for children and for staff. At break times, children might be better off indoors if there's insufficient shade. It'll vary. Curtailing outside work, so thinking about the work of gardeners or maintenance staff, and thinking about activities like school trips. If you're thinking about the very high temperatures we had 2 years ago, or even last week, if you've got a school trip that's where you're going to be on a coach that's not air conditioned, and if you're going to a very I don't know, like a beach or a countryside area where there's very little shade, then is it a good idea to go ahead with something like that? And then, as I mentioned, implementing changes to the working day, starting early, finishing early, or closing part of the building as determined by, the risk assessment, which will relate to the longer term planning. And I'd say excessive heat, it's an issue about which NEU members feel very strongly. At our annual conference in March this year, a motion was passed about working conditions in extreme heat and the need for branches to lobby for the adoption of this protocol in their local authorities and trusts and schools. And we had Alex Green from Let's Go Zero come to speak at our Climate Fringe meeting at annual conference, and she praised this protocol as something that the climate action advisors who work for her charity and who are going to be going into schools and advising on climate action plans, she really liked the protocol. And so, we're pleased that external organisations that we work with are going to be happy to promote it as part of the work they do in schools. And yes, of course, we need a maximum legal working temperature, and staff, and particularly children, we know that they can't learn effectively in high temperatures. But notwithstanding that, even if there was a legal maximum, we would have to be able to enforce it, and we can't rely on the HSE to do that. So it's got to be an area for collectivising. It's going to be widely and deeply felt by staff members. It's very unlikely to just affect one person. Maybe that some classrooms get hotter than others, but very few people are going to be unaffected. And the additional issue for education staff is that they can't just leave a classroom even for a short period to get a cold drink, because they can't leave the children. So for NEU, we'd encourage this to be considered as a whole school issue like any other by the union group, and obviously where possible with members of other education unions. Monitoring the temperature is very important. We do sell NEU thermometers, but I was informed at a meeting last week that the CO2 monitors that got rolled out to schools during the pandemic, they can monitor temperatures too. I think a lot of them might have been ended up, stuck back in a cupboard after the pandemic, gathering dust. And our view has always been that their value extends beyond COVID. And here's an example of how you could use them effectively. But I think most importantly, what I would say is kind of don't wait until the next heat wave is upon us. Think about what happened 2 years ago. Even think about what happened last week. It was pretty hot last week, wasn't it? And plan early for the next heat wave. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. What I really found helpful there was the really wide range of practical ideas and tips you had, both short and long term. Yes, you were talking about schools, but so many of them, I think, applied to many workplaces, not just schools, not just education. So there's a lot there that we can take from that experience to transfer into other workplaces. And obviously, Sarah was talking about the education experience. Like I said, it's not just that sector that we need to be thinking about. And it's not just in the UK. A lot of the world is talking about this topic at the moment. President Biden has just launched measures in the US where employers have to take concrete steps to protect workers from heat. And this is all thanks to a union campaign in America. So these are the kind of things that unions here can also get ideas from to demand from their employers, regardless of what the government policy is. Sorry. So when it comes to climate, be it the air quality, be it the temperatures, we can all agree that we haven't seen a lot of action from this government and they've been slow. But as Sarah said, and as I think others picked up on in the chat, this is where health and safety reps can act. And we also said that really it's health and safety reps that know what's going to work in their workplace or in their sector. And reps, as we know, can really secure safer working conditions through negotiations and actions. So the TUC does have a campaign for maximum working temperatures. And we have also been hearing about a new campaign launched by workplace activists together with climate activists. And this is called the Heat Strike campaign. We will post some resources about it in the chat, but we'll also send them out to you all if you missed them. So this campaign aims to bring people together to build awareness on the need for urgent action to prevent people working in heat. So do check them out, take a look at their resources. And like Sarah said, you need to plan about it. Don't wait for the sun to come out and start beating down before we actually take action. You can start now. We're going to move on now to hear from Graham Petersen from the trade union Clean Air Network. And Graham's going to talk to us about this issue as it relates to, as it is in the title really, clean air and the work that his organisation has been doing. So Graham, I understand you've got something you want to share with us. If you want to get that loaded up, we can get going with your information. Okay, can't hear you at the moment. So if you unmute as well, I can maybe talk you through just sharing that.
Yeah, I was just going to say you were going to do some filling, but yeah, let me just.
Yep, no worries. So yeah, while Graham's just getting that loaded up, what we also want to hear from you, our reps who are watching this, when you're conducting inspections, health and safety inspections in your workplaces, how many of you also monitor temperatures? Do you have thermometers? Do you have union issued thermometers? Let us know. We like hearing what's going on in workplaces. So if temperatures are part of your inspections routine, let us know. You can put your stories in the chat. Okay, if you're all good, Graham, I can hand over to you.
Yeah, I think I'm good to go if everybody can see that. Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation. And certainly I think this is a really timely event, not least with the election coming tomorrow, where climate has been made a political issue, not always in a good way, I'm afraid. And although I'm going to be talking about air pollution, hopefully people will appreciate this very close link between air pollution and climate change. I think, it has clearly been used as a bit of a political football. People are focused on the costs of net zero and dealing with climate change issues, but at the expense of ignoring the costs of not actually taking any action. And that applies to air pollution, but more importantly, climate change more generally. So I think it's great that particularly after this year of action around climate risk to workers, this connection between the two things is increasingly being brought out. Let me just take you through the first slide. First of all, I was just going, just to outline what I was going to cover. Anna talked about the Trade Union Clean Air Network, just to say a few words about that. Then to look at some of the resources that are available for union reps who are interested in taking up air pollution as an issue. Then wanted to quickly just refer you to a case study that we've used to highlight how this is something which, not just at workplace level, but at community level, is something that unions can be addressing. And then finally, some ideas about if people do want to take up this challenge, some of the potential next steps. So let's start with the Trade Union Clean Air Network. It's a kind of illustration of what I've said earlier, where you've got a climate-based organisation like the Greener Jobs Alliance and a health and safety-based one, namely the Hazards Campaign, who came together back in 2019 to look at ways in which we could highlight this issue of air pollution. And we issued a charter, which was, as you can see, signed up for by 14 of some of the bigger trade unions and a number of other organisations. And that charter probably needs updating, and we're in the process of doing that. But we've used that as the basis for trying to launch a campaign around this key issue. So one of the things that we've done by way of supporting union reps who want to take up this is on Workers' Memorial Day, we actually issued a new set of guidance, and that's the flyer for it, including the QR code to actually download it. And that contained, I mean, on the flyer, you've got a short checklist there, but this is quite a comprehensive guide that was produced. And it's designed for workers who want to actually pick up this issue at the workplace and try and get support for improvements. Because one of the areas that we really felt needed to be addressed was, although there's a lot of discussion about air pollution, it's largely been seen as a public health issue rather than an occupational one. And when we talk about air pollution also, it's largely about outdoor pollution with very little action or attention paid to the hazards of indoor air pollution. Now, I know many workers are exposed to both, not least perhaps when they're traveling to work, they're going to be exposed to a whole range of contaminants. And when they get into work, they're going to be exposed to even more. And clearly there's some crossover between the two, where indoor air is getting to pollute the outside and vice versa. So this is one of the guides that we've produced. And what we've also done, and this has been launched actually this week, is we put together a 10-minute film on indoor air pollution. And again, there's a flyer that's available to that, for that, where you can actually click and get the film up and running. So we'll hope that will be also a useful example of a resource that can be used both in the community and at work. The case study that I was talking about, which is illustrated in the film, is an example of primarily community union action. And this is where Battersea and Wandsworth TUC, Local Trades Council, decided that they wanted to use the Love Unions Week in February as the start of a clean air campaign in the borough. And what prompted that was the fact that we did a lot of monitoring in the area, both outside and more particularly inside Tooting markets. Now, what this highlighted was the very high pollution levels associated with commercial cooking, because both these markets have a huge number of food outlets, and the pollution levels are off the scale, particularly for particulate matter 2.5, which is the most dangerous potentially form of air pollution when it comes to that sort of commercial cooking. And what it illustrated was the fact that workers and the public inside these areas could potentially be exposed to 200 times the safe level that the WHO have designated for outdoor or ambient air pollution. So it illustrated straight away for us this problem of the difference between the two, where although standards for outdoor air pollution aren't good, they do exist, and they're far better than what they are for indoor air pollution, where if you look at, in terms of workplaces, the workplace exposure limits for something like particulate matter 2.5, then they're set at a crazy level. As I say, at 200 times the amounts for outdoor air pollution. So this campaign was designed to actually try and highlight that. And it was also a campaign where we've been working closely with the local authority and had meetings with the market owners. And we're still a long way from resolving this, but we're having regular meetings. We're putting in comprehensive monitoring and testing to actually get a much better idea of the extent of the problem. And we're hoping we can use this as an example that could perhaps be taken up elsewhere. Anyway, if you get a chance to look at the film, and I'd strongly urge you to do that, then you'll get more information about that. So finally, because I know I haven't got much longer, just wanted to highlight some of the next steps. I mentioned this film. One of the other things to pick up on what I said about the inadequacy of the law and the enforcement is that we're going to be producing a briefing paper to launch at Hazards Conference next month. And that will hopefully be used to lobby politicians, including, let's hope, a new set of politicians in government, but not just nationally, also regionally and locally. And there are the four levels, aren't there, of where we need to take action, both in terms of national, regional and local authorities and government, but also at a workplace level as well. And so we do provide support for unions who want to monitor pollution at their workplace and in their community. We've got quite sophisticated monitoring equipment that can be used. We've also got the guide that I mentioned. And we really need to make sure that unions have got the resources, feel confident that they can actually both call for risk assessments in hazardous areas where they work, and then where those assessments are done, to actually vet them, to interrogate them, to make sure that they are actually providing the sort of control measures that are going to be needed. And, you know, this isn't going to be easy, don't get me wrong. You know, we're talking about capacity here. We know that capacity is something which a lot of unions don't have. But, you know, there are opportunities. And, you know, we know that, for example, at regional level, mayors, sub-regions have got to have climate adaptation policies in place, not just to deal with air pollution, but for things like extreme heat, flooding, and other extreme weather events. And also at local level, local authorities are expected to do the same. So this is in addition to the national adaptation programs that the government have got have in force, as well as national climate risk assessments. So in terms of a trade union input, you know, there are a whole range of different levels where unions, if they've got the capacity, can actually try and intervene to make sure that air pollution issues are being effectively addressed. So as part of that, I mean, the final bullet point there on this slide is it's actually saying that we need to be making sure that climate is a core bargaining issue. And we've heard from Sarah about some of the guidance that the NEU have issued. Other unions need to do the same. My union, the UCU, has actually put forward Green New Deal bargaining as a way to actually proceed on this. We've got claims in with the further education sector, with one being put in for the HE sector as well, where climate is actually part of things like the pay claim, terms and conditions, and so on. So for us, I think that's a way in which you potentially make sure this isn't just a little side issue. This is actually central trade union business. And clearly what we are going to need, you know, because time is running out, quite honestly, that unless unions do actually step up to the plate on this, whether it's on air pollution or more generally on climate issues, then we're going to be facing a very uncertain world where, you know, all kinds of problems are going to be faced by workers, you know, in the workplace and also in their communities. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Graham. I think that was really helpful, really lots for us to take in there about air quality and some of the things that we can get on the bargaining agenda in workplaces. Okay, I'm now turning to our final panel speaker, Rory O'Neill from the ITUC. And Rory is the Health, Safety and Labour Standards Advisor. So, Rory, over to you before we take some of the questions that you've all been posting for us.
Thank you so much. It's an honour and a pleasure to be invited. It's also a bit of a sod coming last because everything's been said, and I've been watching the brilliant contributions in the chat. I mean, that's the real win for me here, seeing the quality of the safety reps and the work they're doing. So congratulations to all of you. Putting it in the global context now, as Anna said, I'm the Health, Safety and Labour Standards person at the International Trade Union Confederation, representing you and 200 million others at negotiations with the International Labour Organization and the World Health Organization and places like that. Now, one of the big issues for us is mainstreaming climate change, the climate crisis in occupational health and safety language, because for us it's inescapable, you know. And in the last 2 years, we've got language on emergency preparedness and planning, in codes of practice, on textiles, on construction, on forestry, on biological hazards and other documents. So it's becoming part of our day-to-day union safety business. And, you know, there's pretty pressing reasons for that. A report from the ILO that came out in April estimated that 70% of the world's global workforce is exposed to climate-related health risks. And, you know, it's killing tens of thousands every year worldwide, and many, many hundreds of thousands, and probably millions being made sick as a result and having their working lives ruined. And it's not just about baking to death. You know, the heat and the discomfort and the health effects from that are pretty obvious. But we're seeing diseases like cancer, heart disease, cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases, and mental health conditions, all linked directly to climate effects. One thing in the chat was someone mentioned, I think Stuart Gray, is this relevant, this event relevant to outdoor work as well? Of course it is. We're dealing with outdoor worker problems probably more acutely than any others at the moment. For example, van drivers baking in their trucks. We see plantation workers, banana workers developing something called idiopathic kidney disease, which is considered the first epidemic of climate change, the first work-related epidemic of climate change. And you're talking hundreds and hundreds dying as a result of a disease that no one knew about until we started realizing climate change was at the root of it. And it's not just about the heat, of course, as Graham mentioned, the World Health Organization mentioned last year in December that it had been the worst year for storms, hurricanes, blizzards, tornadoes, extreme weather events, floods, wildfires on record. So we're getting ourselves into a bit of a death spiral with this. You know, the climate crisis increases pollution, which is something Graham's talked about. For heat, we get temperature inversions, we get smog, we get forest fires and the fallout for that. For floods, we get wrecked homes and businesses. It's difficult to get to work, contaminated watercourses, sewage backflow. So every aspect of our lives and our working lives is being affected by it. And if you look at another factor, the spread of vectors of disease like insects, we see malaria and dengue fever returning in Europe and in the US at the moment, because the range of mosquitoes is spreading, and it's the same for other bugs. So it's easy to say, you know, when you work in the global world, that it's something that's happening over there, but it isn't something that's happening over there. It's something that's happening everywhere. And, you know, if you want to say, why is it relevant in the UK? Well, I'll give you 3 reasons for starters. One, we've just had the 2 hottest years on record. And so whether you're frying at work or skating on thin ice, because we're also seeing extremes of weather in the country, that's the reality for safety reps when they're dealing with work. And it has to be remembered, as Graham pointed out, work isn't normal life as far as the authorities are concerned. If you go on holiday, you can go off and get in the shade under an umbrella or buy a Solero or have a cold drink. At workplace, that's not the solution that you're presented with. You're expected to work at full pelt in the warehouse. You're expected to work in an understaffed hospital or classroom that's cooking. You're expected to cook in an unventilated vehicle cab or dig in a trench on a construction site. And then we're told, as Graham mentioned, that the standards they apply, despite you being more exposed, are hundreds of times weaker when it comes to being workers. So you're less protected by design. Now, these are issues that we all have to flag and raise, and that's part of the mainstreaming of the issue. We want a second reason. The UK is particularly badly equipped at dealing with it. The FBU, the Firefighters Union, is one that fire services have never had the resources to deal with floods, wildfires and the other threats, yet they're asked to do it. And that diverts resources from elsewhere at times fire services are being pinched. And why, as Anna mentioned, the EU and the US and other jurisdictions are urgently introducing new laws to protect workers, the UK is standing still. The EU has just introduced a climate change and due diligence law, which requires major international companies to actually have a plan to deal with climate change. And that includes the impact on workers. You know, the fundamental principles and right at work are included in the measures within that law. Biden's US government, as you mentioned, have just introduced a draft new federal heat law. That creates a standard of 27 degrees, an action standard of 27 degrees, and a higher duty standard at 30 degrees. Curiously, exactly what the TUC has been campaigning for. So the TUC got it right, and a responsible government would have acted on it when it was given that information in the first place. California just introduced a law on indoor heat to protect warehouse and other indoor workers. And it's something that could easily happen here. That was to protect Amazon workers, you know, primarily. And we're seeing now that that's something we're concentrating on. The global union that represents Amazon worker unions, is developing a global campaign on heat. Another reason that we should be involved as safety reps in dealing with this, and as unions in dealing with this, is that climate change compounds other hazards. You can say the spread of vectors, for example, the insect spread and things like that. 20 odd years ago, I wrote a column for the construction union UCAP, which is now part of Unite, warning construction workers about the risk of Lyme disease. I got a lot of flack. There were articles in the papers, the non-union papers, saying how this was hysterical nonsense, trying to stir up trouble. Well, I was trying to stir up trouble, but it wasn't hysterical nonsense. Lyme disease has increased just about year on year consistently since then. And is a major risk if you work outdoors in areas where there's brush. So that's forestry workers, gaming workers, workers in parks and horticulture and agriculture, all at risk of this disease, something that wasn't on the map and was considered ludicrous 20 years ago when we were raising it. But it also increases other risks that you might not anticipate. For example, your risk of exposure to chemicals goes up due to climate change. We've seen new pests and pests surviving better in the new environments, so that farmers and horticulture are using increased and more toxic pesticides as a result. So every aspect of your risk assessment needs revising in the light of climate change. Now, one thing I get when I'm negotiating with employers globally is they say every turn, hang on a minute, we can't be blamed for heat waves or floods or extreme weathers. And sort of like in the negotiations, you always get this language on something that you may be familiar with called force majeure, an exclusion for employers from responsibility if there is an act of God. Well, it sounds all right until you actually think about it. Amazon in the US built warehouses in a place called Tornado Alley. You might consider that there was a clue in the name there that there might be tornadoes in the vicinity. In 2021, one of those warehouses was entirely destroyed by a tornado, act of God, except the employer could have done something. Those workers, like every other person in the state, received an alarm on their mobile phone saying it was a tornado, find safe shelter. Because they were workers and in a management system, the management said, do not find shelter, you've got a job to do. And 6 died as a consequence. If you want to look at the sun has been around for 4.6 billion years. Like the tornadoes, and employers have had plenty of time to plan. So the issue here is not whether it's acts of God, it's whether employers should have emergency preparedness planning and response arrangements in place so that when these things happen, the systems are in place so that workers survive and they don't die in the rubble. So what happens anyway if we don't do something? Well, I would say bad things happen. If you take the UN Montreal Protocol, which came into effect in the late 1990s, that was to stop us having a hole in the ozone layer, a climate effect that we all want to see addressed. The Health and Safety Executive took one action in response to that. It urged all employers, it put out a notice saying, shift from trichloroethane to trichloroethylene. In other words, shift from a safer solvent to a more hazardous solvent, so that you can save the ozone layer and kill workers. Trichloroethylene is a carcinogen and neuropoison that workers in trade unions have been campaigning to get rid of for decades. Now, what happened here is we moved to something more hazardous. HSE had the choice there to actually say, what do we do when we have to do something to improve the climate? We also make workplaces safer. They could have said, drop solvents and move on. But because that discussion bypassed trade unions, they went to a worse, more hazardous solution instead. And that sort of thing will be repeated all the time unless unions have a controlling interest. The second thing is, if we don't act, then good things won't happen. Just transition is part of our solution to climate change. It means getting workers from dirty, polluting, hazardous jobs into clean, green, safe jobs. Simple enough solution and part of our armory. But it doesn't happen when unions are influencing the discussion. We're seeing now what's happening with Tata. As TUC noted, in Canada, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, and the USA, governments and steel companies are investing in building green hydrogen furnaces to produce primary steel. In the UK, Tata's plan was to shut down the blast furnaces and lose 2,800 jobs. And that was a heavily subsidised plan to lose jobs in the UK in South Wales. Now, unions are still fighting that, but the truth is, without a union voice, the default would be to shed jobs and not create new green jobs. And for final measure, you should actually think, if we don't actually act, we're being killed anyway by what goes on. Work in British standards is actually killing workers from climate change at this moment. A study done in the US of construction workers where they were asked to swallow temperature monitors that measured their internal temperature, found that at 30 degrees centigrade, a regular temperature in the UK, workers were cooking. They had an effective fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit every moment of every working day. Well, when you're sick, you rarely have a fever that lasts more than a day, but that was their normal work experience whilst the temper was at 30 degrees. So it's been made clear by Sarah with the fantastic stuff she's told us about the heatwave project, and Graham about the air pollution and PM 2.5s and the rest. There is a good response to unions taking action. The US heat law, the California heat law, both came as only a direct response to union campaigns. At the ILO's international conference last month, we introduced the first language in an ILO convention, a legally binding convention that includes, puts a requirement for national policies at governmental level to include taking account of climate environment risk when they devise their occupational health policy. Wouldn't have happened without unions raising it. The employers went ape when we did it, but we won that argument. But the real thing is the stuff that was pointed out by Sarah when you look at your risk assessments and what they do. You know, it's unions that actually recognise the risks. It's planning that recognises the long-term solutions too. She mentioned planting, that's a long-term thing. So we need emergency preparedness and response agreements negotiated by unions as well, making sure that only unions will drive that. And it was key that Shelley mentioned in the chat, and I think Anna mentioned about the heatstrike.uk. There are campaigns out there we can get involved in that take it outside our workplaces and protect our communities as well. So I would advise everyone to go and look at heatstrike.uk. I mean, the alternative to doing all this is that we accept the policy that gives us lower standards for, or less protective standards for workers, and treats us as collateral damage. And that's not the case. The only people, though, that will stand up and put a different message across the trade unions. So that's your job. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rory. And I'll echo something you said quite at the beginning, that it's wonderful to hear from all three of you, but it's also wonderful to hear from the audience about what you're doing in workplaces. I always think that's really helpful for us to hear that, and interesting to hear what's going on. Just on that, about hearing about workplaces, a couple of months back, we here at the TUC had an inspections week, your workplace safety inspections week, where we asked you to submit the outcomes of your safety inspections. Please do still do that. We'll share the link of how you can share that, how you can tell us about that, and we'll give you recognition for doing that inspection. Okay, I'm going to try and look through some of the questions that we've had submitted from the audience. The first one I think I can answer. Someone's asked what other health conditions are affected by temperatures at work, and this list is not limited to, but includes heart disease, thyroid conditions, diabetes, skin cancers, migraines, multiple sclerosis, respiratory conditions, among others. And of course, extreme heat can cause dehydration, heat exhaustion, skin damage, etc. That's just a very short list. I've got a question for you first, Sarah. You mentioned in your presentation that you had done some kind of wider workforce training on this and awareness raising, and maybe with the kids in schools and perhaps the parents as well. One of our viewers has asked about raising awareness. What examples have you got of this learning that you did? Was it like posters? Did you have learning sessions? How did you do it?
One thing I'd draw attention to is our new training program for green reps. This is a relatively new initiative for us. It's been going for just over a year. We've run a couple of sessions already, and my colleague Rosie Hazard, who leads on that, is in the chat. So in terms of awareness within schools and what green reps and also health and safety reps can do, I'd like to draw attention to the green reps, our green reps checklist, which Rosie has posted in the chat. So I think that would be one example.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll make sure that's shared with you all. Okay, next question, perhaps to all of you. Wave if you think you can answer. Have we got any studies or evidence on how hot spaces affect productivity? If we had that kind of evidence, it might be something helpful to raise with employers. Is there anything out there we can use? Rory, go for it.
Quite a lot of evidence. Some of it I've quoted in Hazard's magazine about how climate effects reduce productivity and profitability, and we've been using it in arguments where the employers in the US particularly have been saying that climate measures are a burden on business to try and block local ordinances. So that is available, and I can dig some stuff out and try and put it in the chat if I do it while still on the screen.
If you don't worry, send it to us and we'll make sure it's included to everyone when we send out the recording link. Okay, we've had quite a few questions about hours of work, and considering the days are longer in the summer, do the panel think that we should perhaps adjust work or school hours during the summer months? Are there things we can do around that, you know, the times of day?
Yeah, I think you can in schools. I mean, it was something that was suggested when we were discussing through our health and safety organising forum what should go into the heatwave protocol and discussing with the other unions, and that was a suggestion. I mean, we know that schools in Europe, they tend to start earlier and finish earlier, and we haven't traditionally had that pattern. But you know, if it's something that you plan for, then it's easier to implement. I mean, obviously parents are going to be up in arms if you say, right, from tomorrow we're starting at 8 o'clock and we're going to finish at 2 o'clock. It's not going to go down well. But I think parents will understand that it's in the interest of their own children if they're kind of brought into the discussion, and if they're given adequate notice. So yeah, again, I think it needs to be you need to consult with the members and the reps in schools, because for some it might create problems, if other workplaces aren't moving in a similar way. But it's definitely worth having that conversation, I think.
Thank you. Rory?
I'm still loving the chat, thanks. I'm just watching it go by. It's brilliant. Yeah, I've just been working on the negotiations for Amazon globally with the Global Union Uni. And one of the things, this is why unions need to be doing this about the hours and things like that, and the breaks and the rest, because the things we have a grown-up discussion about it. One is, if you change the hours, you do it without a loss of pay. Amazon, what we're negotiating rest breaks at the moment. But if you do rest breaks, then you lose your bonus pays, your performance rates and things like that. So it's unions that recognise that you need to protect pay rates as well. One of the comments in the chat was about getting lighter uniforms for nurses. Absolutely correct. And we're arguing in the Amazon case and elsewhere that the lighter uniforms should be provided free. It should be something that comes out in the risk assessment, because they're not treated as PPE, yet it's required wear. And on the international stage, all safety required equipment, which would be that uniform, should be free to the worker and stuff like that. So it's about union savvy in negotiating things that put things in the round, not just arguing things in isolation.
Thanks, Rory. We've had quite a few questions as well that relate not just to temperatures, but ventilation and air quality, particularly around maybe schools and prisons that are in older buildings or Victorian buildings where it's difficult to change things, where the building has obviously been around for hundreds of years. What advice do you have there? Because I imagine it might be something that an employer would use as a reason to play hardball in bargaining. Have you got any tips?
Yeah.
Graham, do you want to go first, and then we'll come to you, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think got to recognise that there will be these issues, and that this doesn't come without a cost. And we need to be clear about who should actually pay for that, which is why I think it's very worrying when I look at what's on offer in terms of some of the manifestos in this election. What's actually going to be potentially out there to deal with some of these issues. I mean, certainly the two main parties aren't committing to something like a Clean Air Act, which has been a demand of the environmental movement for some time. If there was a decent Clean Air Act, then that would actually go a long way towards helping deal with this, because it would actually provide a legislative framework, and it would also hopefully be backed up with finance to actually make sure that the standards that were adopted were implemented. The problem we've got, particularly with clean air, is that the government have actually just decided to devolve it down to local authorities. Now, as we know, local authorities haven't got any money, and where they do try to raise money through things like clean air zones, you get a backlash from the press and from some people who clearly feel that they're going to be adversely affected. So my main concern is that for many of these things, particularly in the public sector and commercial public buildings, where the local authority will be expected to play a role, local authorities are currently starved of cash, and there's no sign that even with the new government, that cash is going to be available anytime soon if you're basing your model around some future growth. We need this money in the short term, and what I think unions are going to need to do is to lobby to say, look, unless you are going to be looking at serious public spending cuts, never mind improving the situation and make money available so that these sorts of improvements could be made to buildings, then, you know, that's we're going to have real problems in the future around this.
Thanks, Graham. What did you want to add, Sarah?
Yeah, just briefly, you know, during the pandemic, the issue of indoor air quality and ventilation, we became acutely aware of the importance of it in classrooms. I mean, eventually didn't happen for months, but the DfE rolled out CO2 monitors to schools, which were possibly used for a short period of time, but probably aren't being used now. But really they should be, because it's, you know, at the time it was a proxy for COVID, but, you know, there are much wider issues involving indoor air quality. And, you know, in some cases we're saying you need to roll out HEPA filters to classrooms to help clean the air. And there's plenty of evidence. We've done a lot of work with Hilda Palmer on this, that clean indoor air, it helps staff and children to concentrate. It boosts standards of learning. So really, you just think it's a no-brainer for any government that's, even if all they're focused on is improving educational standards, it would help in that respect. It would stop children getting ill in school, not just COVID, but any other bugs that are floating around. And so why not do that? It would be relatively inexpensive, but you know, there was a limited rollout of HEPA filters during the pandemic. Some schools have purchased them. The NEU has purchased some, and we're using them on our own training courses. So we're trying to sort of practice what we preach in that respect. But yeah, it's really important. Thanks,
Sarah. We do have a whole webinar about ventilation and indoor ventilation specifically. So we will also share the link to that in case you want to explore these issues in more depth. We've also had a question about the opposite end of the scale when it's really cold. And about planning. And back when it was considerably chillier, I think it was February, we did a webinar about that, about the things you can do to plan for the cold weather. Much of the guidance is the same, like don't do it when it suddenly starts snowing, much like we've been saying, plan ahead. So, you know, when the seasons are opposite, you're perhaps planning for when it comes around, when it's really hot again or when it's really cold again. Okay, we're nearly time to wrap up. So my final question to you all is about Climate Week, which I'm told is in September. Have you got any plans to campaign on this issue there? Or what are some suggestions that safety reps or green reps in workplaces can do to raise awareness during Climate Week? Let's start with you, Rory, and then we'll just ask the other two as well.
So I the other two would start, to be honest. I mean, for me, it's making it a part of my everyday. It's not a calendar thing. And given that I work on the global stage and the temperature is different and the season is different, and just about everywhere I work, it don't work quite so well. I would say my overwhelming lesson is we have to mainstream OSH. It's not a one-day thing. It's like Christmas. It's for every day, or Eid or wherever else. It's for every day, not for just for the special occasions.
I think the advert was puppies for life, not just for Christmas. So we'll use the same thing. Workplace temperatures all year round, doesn't matter whether it's hot or cold or something like that. Sarah, any final thoughts on Climate Week in September? Will schools be doing anything about this?
It's something that we'll be discussing. We have a very active climate network at the late climate network where a large number of lay activists have joined. So we tend to discuss responses to things like that in that forum. So yeah, I think we'll take suggestions from there. But yeah, I think I agree with Rory that it's always easy to focus on easy stuff. And yes, obviously it does need to be mainstream, but when you've got an active network like that and a WhatsApp group, then it's very easy to kind of share good ideas. And I think that's how suggestions get passed around.
Thanks, Sarah. We will absolutely encourage you to do that. Share ideas amongst your fellow reps, again, with other people in your branch or with people in your wider union and beyond. Graham, any thoughts?
Well, just a quick one, echo what's been said. Yeah, in terms of air pollution, well, we've got the hazards conference taking place end of August, beginning of September, which hopefully as many people on this call as possible will look to attend. But the briefing paper that we're going to, I mean, this will be discussed in workshops at the conference, but the briefing paper will hope can be launched and then taken out there to lobby politicians to actually try and make improvements on not just the law, but how it's enforced. So for us, that would be a key thing. But I mean, the TUC will have had their motions, which hopefully there'll be some decent ones around climate risks, and that can also provide unions after September with an opportunity to take some of that forward as well.
Thank you so much, Graham. And thank you again, Rory and Sarah. Shelley will be at the Hazards Conference. So those of you who will be going, you'll be able to see her there as well. We've had some fantastic advice from you all today, both from the panelists and from the audience. Don't forget, if you tuned in live today, we will be awarding you a TUC digital credential, which recognises that you came today, that you can use to show what you learned or share it with others. This is also our last webinar before we take a bit of a break for the summer. So we will be returning to you in the autumn. Do look out over the summer for an email from us at the TUC. We like to, a couple of times a year, ask you about what you want from us in terms of webinars, about subjects, about other things we should be doing. So do look out for that, because we want to hear from you. And all remains me to say is say have a great summer, and we will see you back here in the autumn. Bye-bye for now, and see you again soon.